Bon dia. Good day, folks. This is Stephen Godfrey, P.V.P, and I decided to come on and again provide some quick updates, talk about some current issues, and as we get closer to our rollout, be very pointed on issues so that in fact we can take that, build momentum, and then there will be a show tagged around this. First thing I want to talk about is the most recent event. There was a call from a city councilor, Councilor Flynn of South Boston, and he asked for removal of chief of economics. And in that space, the way that it came out, which is politically normal. Things happen behind the scene in perpetuity. They're launched in such a way to make the most effective impact. And how not to make the most effective impact by utilization of a Monday. So as a result, on the 18th, there were notices that flew out post the article's release. And again, let's analyze the article. The article mentioned immediate removal, and then it called for ethics outside committee that would come in and then evaluate and look at all of the ethics within the internal departments, that to include city council as well. And so here that this effort is being done, and I think it's important that we use media literacy and look at what is not being said and what is being said. So there's an ethics call, and ethics can include everything from fiduciary to staff relations to, depending on the roles, outside of the organization, nepotism, just a whole bunch of things depending on what the standards and the rules of operations are. And so when you see this, and when you see it done in such a way, understanding the author of the message, who is the son of Ray Flynn, and some of us are trying to make connections to Trump and all this other stuff, and we got to keep our politics local. Just because everybody's a different pigmentation does not necessarily mean that that's, especially in a conversation of a divisive America, let's not utilize this tool of race as the first response to everything. Yes, we understand you're in Massachusetts. Our history is clear, but that should not be the beginning of the conversation. What should happen is all of those that have served and known, and I'll use me as the example. I reached out to Counselor yesterday in my capacity of chief of my two organizations and president of one and chief of the other, and asked for further clarity, recognizing that I understand the limitations, because if one is calling for an ethics review or an evaluation, then one must understand that there's something at play. I mean, let's not be fully naive, whether right, wrong, or indifferent. The question becomes was there indicators within the message that the Herald, I believe, wrote that indicates anything? Because there's a whole host of responses that says, and I've been either parts of emails, things have been sent to me. I'm also the co-chairman of Nubian Square. And so I understand a lot of the dealings, and I'm more so a student of Harriet Tubman. I try to assist behind the scenes to bring maximum impact and action and build capacity of others, right? And so in that, I hear and see a lot of things, and then when it deems appropriate, I intervene. So as head of the organizations, I wrote a request to Counselor Flynn, again, recognizing what was said, recognizing that there is a process, and I'm not asking them to infringe on that process, but what I am asking of a prominent leader, so that we then can respond to community members as we all try to figure this out. And I also then stated to say that I hope that there is further clarity forthcoming. But please, could you give me a call so that, in fact, we can discuss? And many of us that sit in these roles who work with folks politically in our city to advance the causes for the entire city, that's what your call should be. Hear that there is a fundamental fight in America right now called due process. And I go from the top to locality. It's important that we follow it. It's important that we're not considered, just like others, a transactional player. So White House currently transactional. I think they're very clear about it. And it's important that locally we're not transactional, because transactionals don't create what I call long-term policies. Transactionals are just in the moment. And so if there is a question regarding any of our leadership, our best way is to stick to due process, question the process, or from a neighborly approach, inquire about the process, protect that leader by way of the integrity of that process, because the process protects everybody. respectfully. And so it's important that we remain consistent and not be like those that we're trying to move the bar of equality and social justice. Because if we do what they do, then we're no better. And we can't be impulsive. What is this thing about being impulsive? Just because someone makes an allegation doesn't mean that it's 100. And it's important that the individuals, and again, depends on the situations because some have different leadership styles and also those that they held accountable to, their supervisors, bosses, etc. But it's important that there's a response. This idea, and I've used this in the past about atonement. People are in their roles because they're sophisticated enough to be in those roles. You got to tell the community something because then the community will respond in such a way to protect you, as they should. Because again, our leadership is very valuable to us. And the notion that when something comes out, we got to lean on the process. If we don't do that, then again, we're no better. And then what happens is it becomes transactional from them to us and us to them and them to us. And then generations go by, the next groups come in, and guess what? They're doing the same thing. If we want to be fair and equal, we got to do the same thing. We cannot use the same tools and methods. Some of my older leaders who have these folks that you're calling, the idea that we have not exercised a direct conversation, and maybe we have. I'm speculating until I get further information. But I think it's important for everybody involved, follow a process, protect them to the process. Then you can hold them to standards. And I'll use a bit of history here. So yours truly, when items have came out in the past, financial irregularities for city councilors and state representatives or state senators, there was an effort, groundswell. People came together. Public didn't know the strategy. There was not even really that much outrage because it was all channeled. And in that channeling, raised the process. Globe, Herald, etc. A Cellucci administration was in play, published an article that had all expenses of all state officials from Cellucci down. And then there was irregularities. There was Byron's and anyone that was serving during that tenure was published if there was something on the records. And they used the Office of Campaign Finance and a bunch of other sources, but they were very public. And part of that was because the process was called out. I believe at that time what we had heard was these were expenses, or there were some struggles, and there were some expenses that were not confiscated, but could have been misallocated. So with that being said, folks said, then give us further clarity on all others. And as a result, there was a good process that was facilitated. And I think we all then know what the end results are. But I just want to say that it's important that from a community perspective, in your spirit of what you deem to be protection, make sure that you're not more damning. Protect a young brother who's a leader, if in fact, by way of due process, so that in fact, if something did or say is not, and there's an irregularity, right, that you're operating by from a standard of facts. We should be fighting that, and I guess let's say this too, instead of the fighting, right? But I would say this. You also got to look at it as how and the launch happened. And Flynn comes from a very prominent political family. He's no slouch. He understands that if, in fact, he's going to do this, and I say this to all my officials and advocates who've been around forever, we know that there is an R. Kelly video or something, right? That it better be, right? Because you don't spend your political capital on this. And I'd argue that he's a local representative from South Boston. So the idea that part of the charge is that if they see an irregularity, whether you represent your district or not, you raise it. The how is not done by necessarily a kumbaya quorum. And, and let's be fair about this in all respects. The notion that there was a call from the same counselor to create an ethics committee for the council, and we all said no. The council shot it down. Hear that this probably wouldn't be here. I don't understand. And I'm really surprised because my elect of color, I didn't really understand that level of vote. And we invite you to provide a level of clarity. But the notion that there was a calling for an ethics committee and you guys all said no. So here that this is, some folks could say that this is, and that was for the council, but some could say that this is independent, could be. Some could say that this is race-based, and I've heard some say that this is a Josh Kraft and a Mayor Wu thing and yada yada. Could be. I think stretches because again, we don't know what the facts are. And until we know the facts, obviously all alleged, which is part of public office, is that if someone's going to call that out, then they better have some hard circumstances because that's Flynn knows that if he does not, it's coming back to him. He doesn't. He's smarter than that. And if he again comes from a well grounded political family, and so they all know that. So I also want to say that the things that weren't included in the article also provides, in the spirit of politics, and you got to give this to either and I'm going to say the Herald, but I'm probably going to say it's per the Flynn office, that they didn't disclose everything. There's an obligation. Was the obligation met? But in that process, there's also a protection of the individual that was exercised as well. And I know that that may be a little comprehensive because folks feel like the narrative has to be fully spelled out. But this is media literacy, PVP. This is important to protect our leaders, look at some of the messages, things that were said and were not said, and then advocate. So we are going to follow up and make sure that we get further clarity because that's what we owe the young man in the administration when in fact you make these claims. We want to have a factual conversation as of today. And again, I'm up always early and preparing for the Lady Eve because tonight is Ward 4 has an important forum at their meeting tonight. There is an important effort happening in the Roslindale area, I believe that is also tonight. And so that means Lady Eve. And so we're always up early, trying to do the good work, spend some time engaging folks. But I wanted to come on and just say that we have to put everything into context. And we cannot be impulsive because when we're impulsive, we can be offensive. We can be isolationist. I've heard people shoot across about it, don't have a clue, nor even have given it a chance, and have hung it all on race. You're in Massachusetts. If you're from the Bean, Boston, Massachusetts, you understand race-based. Here, I've even heard people question billionaires. And I go, if you're from Boston, Massachusetts, you understand that we're not afraid of billionaires. And billionaires' behaviors do not articulate the same that's happening on a national level, right? We want to operate with facts within our disposition and be clear. And when we're not clear, take the time to figure it out, so that we're not impulsive and that we're not damaging and we're not conflicting with others that are trying to do this work. There's a saying in the South that, right, when all folks are in the boat, right, we could get anywhere together. Well, here it's an interesting because folks say, hey, let's all get in the boat. But y'all got all kind of folks that don't know how to drive the boat and supposedly are those individuals that help craft and shape the boat. And then in this new, they're acting as though they don't know how the boat is floating. And so history shall not be rewritten because it's always kind of the pathway forward. And then it changes. Let's not be impulsive. Let's be intentional, deliberate, strong on the conversation. I think the candidates need to infuse this. If there are forums that are happening and you're not asking them about, my heart is in Roxbury, because that's where I reside in terms of my work and advocating for the people. So my tone is different if you're advocating. That's for all advocates, depending on where you're advocating, right? But the integrity for Roxbury and all of the stuff that is happening and not happening. And when you then hear what the city council forum was, because it wasn't a hearing that ensued, that then allowed kind of the space that we're in now, city councilor candidates for District 7, make sure that's in the forefront. Hear that there is a lack of what I call, and a lot of folks are raising it, right? A lack of good candidates. That's the buzzword that's going around. And in that space, folks are saying, well, they lack this, they lack that, and what do they stand for Roxbury? Well, I think that's a double-edged sword. And I believe that those are the core questions and values. But like anything, you have to look at all the candidates, give an opportunity, and pick your best who provides closer to the outcomes that you desire. And if we don't have that, it's up to us to find the one that is best and groom them. Be deliberate and intentional and groom them, educate them, bring them in on the issues. Let them understand that Roxbury operates by way of the external dealing with the internal differently than it does in other parts of the city, and that we're done with that. And what we need is to make sure that we have advocates that really understand that. And by understanding that, understand and your connection to that community. If you're not, and again, I'm addressing the calls that we don't have good candidates in D7. And I don't know who they all are because a lot have declared, but as you know, until official signatures, which I believe is in closing, is done, right? I think we should uh, encourage. And I heard a great leader once just recently say that encouragement should be encouraged based on the people that can actually do the job, based on the amount of applicants that you have. And yes, in that pool, you may not have the right applicants, but those are the applicants that you dealt with. And then you have to synthesize a pathway forward that says, hey, which one of these can really do the people's business? We got to add all of that to this, folks. Because if we don't, and get it that there are a lot of other areas that can be explored leading up into this conversation, because there's a lot here. But I think at the end of the day, you're doing it for the people of Roxbury. People of Roxbury deserve it. People of Roxbury should have had, in my opinion, 3 elections. They should have had a special that would have then 30 days turned this around. That would have been voter education. This one, then you would have had your normal primary and then your general. That and the election department was ready. We should have done that. That would have been a great use of tax dollars for Roxbury. 200,000 small precincts for the special election. We should have done it. You don't disenfranchise a community by saying that they're going to be confused about a process when they've been fighting for equitable distribution forever. So here, I'm going to get back at you. I just wanted to come on and share a little thoughts and say long day, long evening. But going back to our leadership, there is a call. And the problem of us coming together and calling it out is because when it first happened, first half an hour or so of when people, I would argue, got comfortable, notified of the facts, notes were going out. And I don't know, and some of them were vilifying, none was really raising the question. And those of us that hold certain positions by way of just holding the positions and leading in communities, process. Use that, less emotions, facts, so that we can get to a positive conclusion. I appreciate you folks. Again, P.V.P. Follow us on YouTube page. Peace.